Morning, Doug. The presidential debate, the last one of this election cycle, was last night. I just want to hear your feedback on it. What are your thoughts?
Yes, well, I was unimpressed because, first of all, it wasn't as amusing as it could be because these guys did not call each other names and put on a sideshow for us. They were both well behaved, which you'd hope a couple guys in their 70s would be capable of. But, I would have much preferred to have heard them explore philosophical differences between the way that they saw the world on a basic level. I would have preferred to, have them talk about national health care, the government involvement in it. Is it right? If so, why? Is it wrong? If so, why? But they were just tossing out, here's what I want to do, here's what I don't want to do, without saying why. So it was not a debate that emphasized here's what I think about something. It was basically, here's what I feel about something. And that's the way they were approaching the hoi polloi voters, who I'm surprised to find 45 million people have already voted. So I think there's going to be a high turnout in this election.
Extraordinary number of early votes. Yeah, extraordinary number. I actually had the same comment last night watching it with my girlfriend. I said, it'd really be nice if they would discuss philosophical, like their political philosophy, rather than just this tit for tat stuff. But I wonder, would voters even care? Would they get it? Is it too hard to consume?
I don't know. I don't know, but I felt an obligation, since we have this podcast and I occasionally get invited on some other podcasts, to make a few notes. I had to force myself to make a few notes. And, one thing that annoyed me, a pet peeve of mine, is that they both referred to what they're going to do with the medical system in this country. I don't think the word medical ever came up. They always refer to it as healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And this annoys me because there's a difference between healthcare and medical care. Healthcare is something that you provide for yourself, which is primarily diet and exercise and good lifestyle and things of that nature. And seeing your doctor once in a while. It's all part of healthcare. It's your personal responsibility. It's not the government's responsibility. What they should say is medical care. Nobody likes that. I mean, it's the idea of operations and anesthesia and surgeons cutting you. That's medical care, and dangerous drugs that you take that solve an even more dangerous problem that the drug tries to cure. So I don't like the idea of healthcare because it makes everybody feel warm and comfy. And if the government is going to provide healthcare, that means you're going to be healthy, as opposed to have to confront some medical catastrophe. I don't know if I'm being clear enough, but it's, what is the word? It's escaping me right now. A euphemism. They like to use softer words. It's
Right.
like when somebody dies, nobody says somebody died. They say he passed away.
Passed
And
away.
it's the same thing calling it healthcare as opposed to medical care that the medical system gives. Anyway, that annoyed me to start with. So they're both on the same. And if I was running for president, which I never would be for so many different reasons, not least of which I would be a completely unacceptable candidate. I wonder if I brought this distinction that I've just attempted to make to the eyes of the public, how it would be received by the public at this point. Do you have an opinion on?
I think they'd be like, what's your point? Well, I think they'd be like, well, what does it even matter? I think it's what they would look at it.
I think you're right. This is you're nitpicking is probably.
Yeah, just let's get back to talking about what we're going to get from the government. Let's not argue over the verbiage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I don't have much confidence in the intelligence of the average voter, which is something you're not supposed to say, incidentally.
Right.
Because one of the most amazing experiences I've had in my life was when I was on the Donahue show, when it was Oprah-sized back in those days, for a full hour on the day before the national elections in 1980. And I may have mentioned this before in the podcast here, but I'll mention it again because it's kind of appropriate. So, I was going on about, taxes and how they were going to bankrupt you and bankrupt the country and so forth. So some guy in the question and answer period, a guy, it was mostly women in the audience, raises his hand and say, well, wait a minute, you're pointing out all these things. Why do we have to pay for it? Why doesn't the government pay for it? Honest to God. That's what the guy said. And in the my thing on YouTube with Donahue, somehow that has been excised from the who and why would excise, this gem that this, I don't know, perhaps because it just made the average person look too stupid.
It's well,
And
definitely.
the audience clapped for him. They thought this was a cosmic breakthrough. The guy was a genius revelation this guy was making. They all thought.
Right. Exactly. This I've shared this Donahue episode with dozens of people personally, and I will make sure I'll link to it in the description of this video. And if you're watching this, you should definitely take some time and watch that. You will be incredibly entertained, if nothing else, from the whole thing. It's really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the first thing that caught my attention in the debate. And then what else did I make a note on? I think this was the major thing, is that Biden did not seem demented. He seemed like kind of a normal guy. He wasn't stumbling too much. He missed a couple of words, like he said the poor boys instead of the
Proud Boys.
Boys or whatever they are. Yeah.
Proud Boys, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of minor things like that, but he conducted himself, like a, reasonably together guy. So the fact that he did that alone maybe meant he won the debate because everybody was expecting him to screw up.
Yeah. You definitely expect in the last debate too. I was surprised that the mental decline was not more obvious, in him. I think that I was really surprised by it. And then last night, it wasn't just that he didn't get his words mixed up, of course, because he did a good job of that, but he also did the normal politician playbook stuff right, where you divert, you neutralize the conversation, you divert it to something else. And you have to be with it to do that. That's not something that can be done without you being mentally present. So I agree. I was surprised.
Yeah, that's right. Did he directly answer any of the questions that Trump posed? Like when Trump accused him and his family, Hunter mainly, I guess, of taking bribes from the Ukraine and from China and I don't know where else. Joe didn't deny it, really, but he made a counter accusation to Trump.
Right.
Was that good rhetoric or? Well, there's nothing he could have said to put these things to bed totally and absolutely.
Nope. He did say when he interrupted, because the camera was on Trump, when Trump was saying some of these things, and he would just say, not true or lies, about some of the things that Trump was, when he was making those accusations. But beyond that kind of trivial, obligatory, you got to throw that out there kind of denial.
Yeah.
You're right. He dished it right back to Trump and goes, well, let's talk about your Chinese bank account, and I'm not, and all this it was all nonsense. Not that I'm buying into any of it.
It's all trivia,
Right.
It is. And so much of this debate was like, what was that movie where the guy finds the guy's in bed with his girlfriend and his wife walks in and she says, what are you doing in bed with that girl? And whoever the actor was said, what girl? What are you talking about? There's no girl here. Who are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes? So,
Yeah.
So much of the debate reminded me of that scene, a variation thereof.
I totally agree. Yeah. But I think that the main point that you're trying to make here on this issue is that he is the mental decline that we had expected and everyone had talked about is not as evident. It wasn't really evident last night.
Which is a point in Biden's favor towards the who won and who lost the debate. But then the other thing I noted was that Biden did exactly what Kamala did, which hurt her a lot, is that when Trump accused him of something, he smiled. And that's weak when it's something, first of all, it's something a woman does. And Biden he probably smiled a half a dozen or more times when he was accused of something by Trump. Trump, on the other hand, when he was accused of something by Biden, just looked rather stoically. which was stronger.
Yeah. Right. Huh.
Maybe
So
that's what people remember. People, I don't think people, once again, this is my low opinion of the American voter coming out. It's that if people don't remember the intellectual points, of which there were very few that were made, they remember the feeling, the projection, the kind of like the
yeah.
ambiance the guy puts forward.
Yep.
So that was bad for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Well, and I think ever since what I guess it was the Nixon Kennedy debate, the visual representation and the communication, through things other than, the argument, have taken more and more precedence. And I think that was true last night. And I think you see, I think Trump was really concerned about trying to make sure he looked presidential, because rather than like a bully last time, which was, I mean, the debate last time, the first debate was just, it was a train wreck in so many ways, but in some ways it was more entertaining. And I think he was worried about looking presidential.
It was it was like a middle school ranking contest where I
Yeah.
expected one of them to say, "Yeah, and so's your old man." Biden would have used that
Yep.
one, probably.
Right. It was an embarrassment, but it was, had its own childish value,
Yeah,
for sure.
that's
So,
right.
but yeah, last night, I think you're right. I think you're right about that. I think you're right that Biden did have make those looks and those smiles look like, I think it's supposed to give off this, oh, there you go again, kind of a, vibe. But it does look like he gotcha almost. It looks like it does look weak. It seems like almost more like an admission as the way the body language reads.
Exactly, an admission smile, not one of those "oh, and there you go again" smiles that Reagan used against
Right.
whoever that was, Carter, I guess. Yeah.
Yep.
And then another note that I made here is that, and I think this was a big strategic error on Trump's part, that he didn't go back again and again to emphasize how ultra leftist the Democratic Party is. And he didn't hammer the fact that they've said again and again that they're going to raise taxes and that they're going to have to put in all kinds of regulations to enforce the Green New Deal and all the rest of these things.
Mhm.
So, he touched briefly on these. He didn't hammer on it, which I think was a
Right.
strategic mistake.
I think so too. And he didn't, even when he, on some of the different points, like the one around fracking, he wanted him to, admit that, he was against basically the energy industry in the US, which he ultimately conceded to. I think he ultimately said, yes, we're going to transition away from it. And, and I think he did get him to concede that point, and that was a win in a way. But because he doesn't summarize it well enough, and he doesn't put a bow on it, it doesn't communicate this whole thing very well. If he would have said let me explain what's at stake in this election, and just summarize the painted two different visions of the future, so people could really see the stark realities between the two, then I think it'd be much easier for people to buy. But instead, he goes back to how we're going to have, like we had last year, the greatest economy in the world. And I don't know who believes that we had the greatest economy in the world.
It's frankly, it's an incredible lie because it's just not true. It's just not true. I mean, the greatest economy in the world was, well, back in the days when there was no regulation and there was a sound currency and, there was an entrepreneurial spirit among Americans at large, as opposed to looking what the government could do for them. People kind of understand that on some kind of level, I think. So he loses credibility by saying that.
He really does. And you can and he cites statistics on, on unemployment rates and things like that. But of course, he's excluding all the people that have stopped even looking for work, and honestly, the quality, the standard of living is lower today on average than it was a decade ago. It just is that way. And I think that's pretty obvious to anyone who's been alive during this time period, that the standard of living is lower. And I think so it does undermine his credibility. And it also, if a politician, I think, can't paint a vision of the future, and instead is it's really hard to get people to rally or change their mind to maybe go to your side. But both of them do is they're both, especially Biden, trying to just point at fear, get you all worried about what's going to happen if you don't vote for them. But I think Biden does a better job of stoking that fear, and he has a lot less to work with.
Yeah, he does. And You know, it's, and it's not so much even that, I don't know what percentage of the country, I guess it's like 50-50 between the two, the Democrat view and the Republican view, which is really Democrat light, is what the Republicans basically are. But how many actual undecided voters are left in the US at this point? I mean, it's not like one third, and one third in the middle. I don't know. I think it's much less in the middle that are undecided, but I don't know. I don't talk to the man in the street.
Mm.
We don't have many men in the street types here in the People's Republic of Aspen.
No, I imagine not. Talk about bubble living. Definitely have that in Aspen.
That's right. I mean, I can seek out a billionaire, or I can seek out somebody that's living in welfare housing in Aspen.
Right.
Really, nobody in between.
Right.
Very few.
Exactly. Yeah. Waiter or housekeeper or billionaire. I think those are the two. Yeah.
Pretty much. A few oddball people in between, but they're trying to find them is like snipe hunting. So,
Well, I think it may be the reason why they're defaulting to fear more is it's more about get out the vote than it is about undecided voters. Maybe if because you talked about how many people had already voted already, it looks like it's going to be a huge year for voter turnout. And if people who might prefer one candidate over the other, but only vaguely, and otherwise wouldn't vote at all, which is most people don't vote, or it's something like roughly half of eligible voters vote every year, right? It's something like that.
roughly, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, then there are all these people saying, vote, it's very important that you vote. And they often say, it doesn't matter how you vote, just vote. And this is one of the most stupid aphorisms I've ever heard.
It really
Yes,
is.
it matters how you vote. But the problem with that saying is they're trying to politicize everybody and get everybody involved in this grab for the assets of somebody else in the country. I
Exactly.
mean, voting should be one of the most trivial and unimportant things you do. Why? Because the government shouldn't have any real effect on your life from day to day, other than keeping domestic order and running a court system and making sure that the Azerbaijani army doesn't land on the East Coast and conquer the country. I mean, it should be a complete triviality,
Yeah.
but they make it into the government into the center of the universe. So the whole thing is corrupt from beginning to end. And anyway, it doesn't matter how you vote, because it's not going to stop what's going to look like a civil war. That's a radical, outrageous thing to say, that we're going to have a civil war or something that resembles a civil war. But I think it's going to happen because these people hate each other, the red people and the blue people. And did we talk in the past conversation, Matt, about the fact that the red states represent the Republicans and the blue states represent we talk
We
about
did,
the meaning of that?
we did not talk about that in a recorded episode. No, actually, it's a very interesting thing, though.
Yes, and perhaps somebody can fill in some blanks here, but how is it, since red is historically has always been the color of revolution and socialism and communism and this type of thing, and the Democrats are all aligned with those values, overtly aligned, how come they're blue states instead of red states? And how do the Republicans, how come they're red instead of blue? It's inverted, like so many things in today's bizarro world. And I did a little bit of research, and it appears that this designation of red and blue to states and counties was some news talking head back in 1980 that arbitrarily assigned blue to the Democrats and red to the Republicans. Because I guess if he'd assigned logically red to the Democrats, that really would have let the cat out of the bag. I mean, in the back of people's minds, red, socialist. So we inverted it, and everybody picked it up, and nobody protested about it. Nobody said, wait a minute, this isn't right. But anyway, and nobody even talks about it. I believe this is the first time anybody's ever talked about it on something that's on air right now. I've never heard it before.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something that I've come to accept and use the terms myself, and never thought about their origin. but clearly, yeah, seems very inverted. I'd be interested to know if anyone watching this has any other information or remembers when they first saw it. As for me, just because my age, I mean, though I remember seeing this in the Clinton era is when is when I noticed it, but I don't know. But obviously that's only when I started really paying attention.
Yeah. Anyway, just one of those things. It's like the corruption of the language. It kind of seeps in the back of your mind and you don't even notice it. So this is another one.
Care versus medical care.
Yeah, exactly. Just one of those subtle things that, has a psychological effect, even if it's not overt. And what else? Oh, here was another point that came up. They seem to spend a relatively large amount of time talking about the cages where they're keeping, migrants, in particular, 545 kids. And I was thinking to myself, wait a minute. It's not like the US government, which is not a model of virtue, but they don't want to keep 545 kids in cages. They have no desire. I don't care who you are, whether you're Trump or Biden or anybody. Nobody wants. So where are the parents of those 545 kids? They obviously are missing their kids. And they know where the kids are. I mean, that's obvious too. Why don't they come and claim their damn kids? I mean, nobody wants them in cages. Nobody.
Yeah, of course not.
So why aren't they claimed? So how is this the US government's fault? This is unclear to me. I'd like it explained to me why the parents don't claim their kids.
I just think there's something about the visual of imagining children in cages that's so powerful that it goes back to this, this visual medium that is now out there to try and influence people. If you can just, no one really wants to talk about why. You just want to basically say you put kids in cages, and and people imagine that idea, and everyone finds that idea totally abhorrent, like totally unacceptable. And so the why and even the whether or not it's even true is sort of unimportant. And who started it, none of that matters.
Why doesn't a reporter go down there and actually talk to some of these kids and say, where are your parents? How did you get separated from them? Do you have a good relationship? Have your parents abandoned you? Which is apparently the case. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. These kids aren't criminals per se.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a great thing for a journalist to do. I just don't think journalists do that kind of thing anymore. I think if they can't, for the most part, most journalists, if they can't just do it sitting as keyboard warriors, it doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't happen. No, it doesn't happen. I mean, the days of H.L. Mencken are long gone. And the days of, the reporter with a little thing in his fedora that says press, that's all gone. They just repeat what they hear from somebody else.
Is there any reporter today that you do respect? It comes to mind?
Yes, the only one I can think of right now is Glenn Greenwald. Do I have that right? The Guardian reporter.
Yep, Glenn Greenwald. I agree with you on him. Another one is, for me, is Matt Taibbi.
Yes, I've seen his name. I'm trying to put my finger on a particular article he's written.
He was a Rolling Stone. He was a writer for Rolling Stone for a long time, and he wrote basically about the financial crisis. And he, didn't know anything about how it all worked, but then wrote it all and was, the left celebrated him because he wrote these incredible pithy takedowns with lots of details of the way the Bush administration had handled lots of things, the war in Iraq and the financial crisis and that kind of thing. And he said this, the whole Russian thing, he's been calling it a hoax since the very beginning, and with lots of great reporting on it, but just is lampooned now by the left. But he's gone independent. So he has his own blog where basically I subscribe monthly just to his writing alone. And he's great. I mean, I think he's a journalist, and like they all used to be. And I mean, if they won't attack both sides, if they won't attack power, regardless of who's in charge, then that they're not real. I mean, they're not real journalists.
That's a good point. I'm going to have to go on to his blog. And there's one other very important, and that is Seymour Hersh. He uncovered the My Lai massacre, of which it said there were many. There was, in what book was that brought up? I think it was Chris Hedges' book, War is the Force That Gives Life Meaning, if I have that title correct. And Hedges, if I'm correct that was the book, I think so, pointed out that there were dozens of My Lai lookalikes, but they weren't reported. And this is not an indictment of American soldiers in particular. This is just stuff that happens in war. It's just all wars at all
There's no
times.
clean war.
And Hersh, risked his neck to bring that to the public's eye. And he also risked his neck in pointing out that Osama bin Laden maybe wasn't killed in the way that we all think he was with that SEAL team raid.
Mm-hmm.
And then he pointed out, oddly enough, that all or almost all of SEAL Team 6 that were involved in that
Died.
in a strange helicopter crash later on.
Mm.
Statistically kind of improbable.
Yeah.
When did and where did and under what circumstances did Osama die? And we actually have no idea. We only know what the powers that be tell us. And since it's kind of a nice myth, well, we all believe it.
Yep.
But I don't know what happened.
But he has done some reporting on that, and it doesn't get a lot of his stuff doesn't get a lot of coverage. But one of the things I love about Seymour Hersh is that his human contacts, like that he has because of decades and decades of being a good partner, I guess, or like working sources and developing those sources and keeping them confidential, just gives him access to information. It seems like that most reporters would just, especially the new generation reporters, they can't even imagine the level of access that this guy has because of these cultivated relationships over many decades. He is good.
Yeah. Other than the guys we've mentioned, I guess, the only people that are, I think, kind of viable reporters are people like Mark Dice that, I don't know if he does reporting, but it's nice that he goes into the street and interviews just people that walk up to him. And,
those are funny, if nothing else.
Funny, if nothing else. Like I remember some years ago, Dice, who's got a pretty successful blog site at this point, I guess, was standing in front of a coin store in Santa Monica. And in one hand, he had a 10-ounce silver bar, and in the other hand, a Hershey bar. And he asked these people, this is an upmarket area, this isn't the ghetto. And he says, here, listen, this is your lucky day. Take your choice. Silver bar, Hershey bar. And they all took the Hershey bar.
Hershey bar. I know.
So,
it is funny. It makes for good good entertainment. Definitely good YouTube.
And there's one thing, I made one more note, that remember when Trump brought up this, it'll cost $100 trillion, he's referencing some program of Joe's. And I wish Trump had pointed, and Joe said, no, it's only going to cost $6 trillion. Wait a minute, $6 trillion, that's twice what the government used to spend in a year for everything. So they're throwing these numbers around, the number of zeros. They're going to have to ask their science advisor what comes after $1 trillion pretty soon. But the fact is that what is that spending going to go on for this Green New Deal to get rid of cars, or I should say internal combustion engine cars? Apparently, the way Joe and the Dems want to get rid of unemployment is hire people like the way Roosevelt did with his failed Works Progress Administration in the 30s. And they're all going to be doing green stuff. Like every house, it's part of the platform, I believe. I'll have to read it more closely. They want to make every building in the United States green energy compliant, which means change the windows, change the insulation, change the roof. So everything's tight as a drum to save energy, which is insanely uneconomic for many reasons. But Trump should have pointed these things out, but he didn't. They're all in the Democratic platform.
Yeah, I wonder if again it's either they feel like it's too complicated to put into his, maybe it's just too complicated of an idea to address. I mean, certainly the numbers are too complicated for anyone to get their head around.
We're talking to the same people that chose the Hershey bar over the silver bar. So maybe they're right. I don't know. And it was a big silver bar too, not just a little one.
Yeah, I saw it. They were almost equal size, basically. Part of the idea is that they were basically looked the same. Yeah. One of the things that, I was just thinking about we can't seem to organize our resources on the government level to make it so that the roads are not always under construction, and the traffic is not always there. So you have a hard time imagining that we can just rally resources together, the government could, and human resources, and deploy them for more high-tech ventures, It's just, it seems impossible to even fathom we could do that when literally we can't keep the roads going. I mean, I was talking with my girlfriend about this, just like major public works projects that were started and completed that I'm aware of, that I've seen personally in my lifetime in the United States. And there are so few. I mean, the only one I think I know of is the Big Dig. It's actually a big, and it was a disaster in every way, but I mean, even like one would believe one could probably be convinced, if you can be convinced that the earth is flat, you could probably also be convinced that aliens installed our highway system, because no one's ever seen a highway built in their lifetime. Or not anymore anyway. It's just like they were always here. I don't know, they're degrading. We can't do anything about them.
Yeah, it's something the ancients did.
Exactly.
That's right. I mean, it's amazing that people want the government to do all these wonderful things, and they don't realize that the government is like the post office. The government is the Department of Motor Vehicles. The department are all these bed bugs that are in the back offices of the schools, administrating, not teaching. Thank God, the last thing we need is more leftist teachers. It's such, well, as we were saying yesterday, the situation is hopeless, but it's not serious, perhaps. So
It's not serious.
no.
Okay. All right. Well, it was an entertaining debate anyway, I guess, in some regard. And I guess we'll see. Does it change your view?
Do you still? So we've talked about this before. So who are you handicapping to win right now? Have you changed your opinion?
I mean, I really think that Trump will win. Actually, I do believe that Trump will win. I think, yeah, my money would be on Trump at this point still.
And I will still stick with Biden for the 6 reasons that we spelled out in an earlier conversation. And the only reason I think that Biden won't win is because maybe with Hunter's computer, if the Republicans release enough stuff widely enough and strongly enough, that might switch that 10% in the middle that are just not adamant either way. But
Exactly.
I think that's my opinion. That's his only hope. I hope that you're right, and I hope I'm dead wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. In the long term, like you said, though, won't, or not even in the long term, it won't matter, because you see the forces of civil war are coming regardless.
Yeah, it is. So it's not like I support Trump. It's just that the Republicans are at this moment less dangerous than the Democrats.
All right. With that, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Doug. We'll talk to you on Monday.
Thank you, Matt. See you then.